And we're back with another episode of the VUCA Fit podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oldham. My co-host, Jose Bolaños, was just on in the green room, and we ran into a little bit of VUCA. And the VUCA doesn't have to do with what the conversation we're going to talk about today is, but I'm going to take this topic by myself because it does have to do with dealing with people in different cities, in different countries, throughout the entire world. So we're going to talk about the concept of leading in a VUCA world, specifically leading others, leading remote teams in a VUCA environment. And so let's just take a recap here real quick. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if we think about what it's like to lead a remote team, you know, a lot of those attributes could be, I would say, magnified. Okay. And let's use an example. So starting at the core of this show, my co-host is in Nicaragua. I am in the United States of America. And so we deal with some VUCA just in the logistics of trying to record our show. For example, things like power outages or slow Wi-Fi or just latency make it such that even something as simple as hitting record on this show can sometimes be a little bit more complicated. One of the things that we've noticed is that when we get done recording and we go through post-production and all those things, a lot of times that we're kind of talking on top of each other because there's a slight delay. He's thousands and thousands of miles away. And that's just one of those things that we also deal with in our other businesses when we're dealing with remote teams, dealing with remote clients is, just latency and technology, for example. That's one example of a VUCA. So I'm going to take the things that I've learned specifically from running a hybrid business model for the past decade, where I've always believed that the best work and a lot of times the best workers just aren't going to happen like right inside my office. Okay. And I've actually believed this for a very long time. And my last company, that was something that I was a big fan of and a big proponent of back in like 2008 and 2009. Okay. So I've been a big proponent of the work wherever you are model, as long as technology's enabled us to really do this effectively. So let's think about the things that matter when we're trying to lead others. Let's say a remote team. So I am a CEO. I'm in charge of employees in Asia, in Latin America, and in the United States. Okay. So we were spanning multiple time zones. We're spanning multiple native languages. We have different holidays that we celebrate in each of those countries. Yet everybody who works for the company works on US based hours. Okay. So we've kind of got rid of one of the big things that can be a little bit challenging is just like the time zone differences, right? But let's also think about another thing that's come up this week. So my assistant, Jessie, and also our show producer, she is in the Philippines, in Davao City. She sent me a message earlier this week that said, hey, we're having power outages. So I'm having to work from my phone today. This is just another thing where, not anything related to where she is or where I am and the difference between the two, but the fact that it was just another piece of something happening in the world. So her infrastructure or whatever it was, or storm, I still don't know why she was having power outages, but those translated into impacting the team here in the United States that she supports, our work. So how do we do all this? How do we manage and lead others, specifically remote teams, which are becoming more and more prevalent post-COVID era in a world that definitely identifies as a VUCA type of world? And, one of the things that I've found is that open and honest and consistent communication solves not only a lot of issues just overall in your life, but definitely helps when you're doing so with a remote team. And it doesn't matter if that team is domestic or international or a combination of both, like the teams that I've led. When you're clear in your communication, So for example, we use Slack as our internal chat tool. Okay. And that's where we do a lot of communication back and forth. Sometimes we'll be communicating back and forth in Slack by typing, and we'll realize that maybe that message isn't getting through, or the tonality of that message isn't getting through. And so we'll look at elevating our conversation based on what type of either project we're working on, or if it's going to be more effective to have a different type of meeting than just like asynchronous chat. So if something can't be resolved in asynchronous chat, then maybe we'll hop on like a huddle call or a Zoom call or something like that and have a conversation about it, clarify anything that might keep another team member from being able to do their part of the job or the task or whatever it is. And then if that doesn't work, then, we bring in other stakeholders. But we kind of have like this, I wouldn't call it a written system. It's more of a system that we have developed culturally over time, where we realize that different things can get escalated. And at any point in time, any team member can escalate the way that something is communicated, the medium, the way that that message is communicated and then received. And that's been one of the big unlocks for our companies dealing with, remote teams. The other thing that I've realized is that using simple language is also super, super important. Because if you think about just the pace of business right now, things are moving so fast. It seems like things are moving faster than they've ever moved before. And when you layer on top of that, maybe team members where English is not their primary language, they may have been studying it their entire lives, but it may just not be the language they were born into. Or maybe a language that they've been surrounded with. And so they may not pick up things like slang or, things like that, right? So we've tried to build a system that makes it so that everybody understands that we communicate clearly. We communicate no more complex than we need to convey messages to team members so that they can do their part of the job. Okay. Other things that we deal with when it comes to leading a remote team, frankly, one of the things that I struggle with is making team members who are on the other side of the planet feel as included as the people that are in our office working together, the people that I come to work with in Lee Summit, Missouri. And I think we've done a good job of that. It's almost like you'd have to ask our remote team members to ask them how good of a job we're doing. And maybe it's, something that we need to do and be more cognizant of. But, one of the things that we've done to make it feel like our remote team members are a part of our team. This is really cool. I'm proud of this. We had an extra 27-inch MacBook, or not MacBook, a iMac. So a desktop computer, a big, beautiful desktop computer. And we put that at the end of our conference room table. It's basically, we got rid of a chair at the head of the table and we put that machine there. And so, for example, every Monday morning, we have a all hands team meeting where we go through every single thing that our company is working on. And it's a long meeting. And so what do? We've got our team members who are not in Kansas City up on the screen there. They can see us, we can see them. It's basically like they have a seat at the table. Now, kind of like the Brady Bunch, they can't see each other, when they're on the screens. Actually, they can see each other on their own screens. But I think one of the things that I've realized from a leadership perspective is that it makes it feel like for the Kansas City team members that they're literally like right there with us. And my hope is that it makes the team members also feel like they're as included, like they have a seat at the table. And we've actually taken a picture of it and we said, hey, here's where you guys sit when we're having these conversations. Or if we have clients in, and it's basically like they get to sit at the head of this table. And it's really, really cool. Other things that we do is, I mentioned technology. I mean, technology has made it a huge way to make our remote team members feel valued, feel like they're part of the fabric of the company, right? But technology sometimes can also be one of these things that makes it so that some of your messages maybe come out the wrong way or can be interpreted the wrong way. And so one of the things that we're always doing, in addition to using technology to bring our remote team members closer to us, right, is we're also making sure that we use that technology in a way that it is designed and not being over reliant on that technology. So let's use another example. Let's use generative AI. Okay. So generative AI is phenomenal. There's so many great tools or so many great use cases. For example, it's going to be used to create the show notes for today's show. And my assistant is going to do that with one of the 3 or 4 pieces of software that we utilize to record our show. Okay. The number one thing that I think that AI and remote team members can do to make it so that it's a little less VUCA-y, right, is to use those tools in a way that fits within the confines of how DeFactory, my digital marketing company, that's what we're talking about right now, wants to use those tools. So, meaning, if I have a team member go generate show notes, okay, we don't want to just dump those into a random tool that has no context about the show, about who we are, about what we talk about. We actually want to help our remote team members set up conditions for themselves where they're working so that the output of the work that they do is better than or equivalent to the team member that they're supporting's work product if they would have done it themselves. Okay. So that means that maybe we have a GPT that's specifically created to talk about the VUCA Fit show. And it has all of our assets in there, understand what we talk about, things that we don't talk about, what our positions are. And then that makes our remote team member even more effective in using those tools. Okay. Where it could go wrong is if we just use those tools and we didn't give those tools direction, and our remote team members actually end up creating work that ends up not kind of fitting within the confines of the business and the quality that we anticipate. And therefore we end up creating way more VUCA. It's way more ambiguous. You know, the team members are wondering, hey, am I doing a good job? I see somebody else here redoing my work product. You know, it's a double-edged sword, right? Technology by itself is just technology. Humans by themselves are just humans. You combine the two, you know, they're just people and technology. But when you give them more definition and more kind of rules to play by and things like that, it can make that remote team more and more powerful. You know, one of the things that I'm seeing right now, and I actually hate it, we're just going to talk about this right now, is there's so many people out there that are, well, first of all, I don't like the term virtual assistant. We're just going to back up. We're going to go to me not liking that term, because I've had team members supporting me off and on for the past decade, and I never like to call them virtual assistants because we have been early adopters of remote work. I'm like, well, if you're a virtual assistant, then I have a virtual web designer, I have a virtual project manager. I'm virtual because I'm working in my basement, and what's the definition of being here? Is everybody going to come into my basement and work? Right? So this whole concept of having people disperse has actually been one of these things that we kind of designed our business around. It's a feature. It's a benefit. It's one of those things that I'm a huge advocate of. And so therefore, I've always thought that this terminology virtual was stupid. I'm just going to call it what I feel like it is. Secondly, there's this burgeoning industry of people who are going to go out and magically help you take care of all your problems by hiring a virtual assistant and training this virtual assistant for you. Sure. Yeah. That's not going to make all your problems go away. I tried it. I tried doing it without clearly defined rules and all these things, hiring a VA agency to help me. And guess what? We had some dude like sitting there. I still feel bad for him. He had no direction. You know, we had no business hiring him because we didn't have the rules set up and the infrastructure set up for that individual to be successful when it did not work. And that's what I assume a lot of people's experiences with these agencies because they basically treat it like a silver bullet. And a lot of these agencies are selling it as a silver bullet. And it's not a silver bullet. It's a human being. You're asking a human being to join your company. Just like anybody else, you got to have a job description for them. You got to have kind of what defines success. You got to have a training program for them. You can't just hire some random person and say, plug you into my business, and all of a sudden you're going to take all this stuff off my plate. That's just not the way that things work. In well-defined companies where you have well-defined roles, remote work is going to be so much more, I would say, scalable and doable in a way that doesn't create more VUCA in your environment. If you're a smaller company like we are, where sometimes each new team member is a new role within the company, you need to treat that person like they're sitting next to you and create the conditions that would allow that person to be successful, but then go kind of above and beyond and be able to translate that knowledge to somebody who's maybe thousands of miles away. Maybe they're 60 miles away. It does not matter. Maybe they're in your same team. They're just not coming into the office on a daily basis. So this remoteness provides more opportunity for volatility, uncertainty, it definitely adds more complexity and ambiguity to rise to the surface, right? And if I'm going to wrap up this episode and kind of give you like the number one thing that I feel like I can share with you, it's to think about each team member that you bring on board, whether they're within your company, like within the building, within the same office or not. And think about the acronym VUCA: uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and volatile. Okay. Think about those four. And then how could you put that person and also their role? So let's assume that they're not somebody who's coming into your office, through just kind of a mental filter and be like, hey, are the things that we're going to ask them to do going to be volatile? Probably not. Hopefully not. And is the fact that they're local or that they're not local or they're not part of the core team here in your home office going to increase the level of any part of their business, part of their responsibilities in the uncertainty category? And there probably are going to be some edge cases. There are some things that you need to consider. On the complexity side, is it going to be more complex to have somebody else do that job who's on the other side of the planet or somewhere else than local? If so, what are the measures? What are the standard operating procedures, the tools, the processes, the meeting cadences, whatever is needed? What are the resources that you need to help that person be successful under those terms? And then ambiguity, that's probably the biggest thing, particularly for entrepreneurs who, are maybe high level and more on the visionary side and less on the kind of, operations side, where building processes and things like that is challenging, right? I will tell you that ambiguity is probably the number one thing out of VUCA. Ambiguity is probably the thing that you need to look out for the most when you're leading in a kind of a remote world. Is this ambiguous stuff? There's a lot of visual cues and nonverbal cues and all these things that are picked up when you're working with somebody face to face that don't get translated sometimes in written word or however else you're communicating. And so be aware of those things. And I like using that I like using VUCA as kind of a filter. It's like, hey, if we're bringing on somebody and they're going to be a podcast producer and they're based out of Poland and we're in the United States, volatile. What could that person or this relationship create or encounter that would fall under the V, volatile? And make a list of things. And then if the fact that I'm not really, I guess they're in Europe and Europe's, teetering on some war with, you've got Ukraine, you've got Israel, you've got all these things happening, right? Okay. Poland could be considered, that could be considered a volatile aspect of a worker who's in Poland, and they may be impacted by that. And it's just something we need to be aware of so that we're sensitive to that person's world. Okay? Uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and go through all of those things with that team member in mind, with the role in mind. If it's a new role where you're writing the job description, use VUCA as a way to think about all the things that could make it a little bit more challenging for that team member to be successful in your organization. And then just document that, whether it's in their job description or it's conversation with that person. Be like, hey, here are some things that we foresee as an organization that we may need to work through. The time zone difference. Okay, let's use that. That's a perfect example. How are we going to overcome 6-7 hour time zone difference and just work through a plan, because it's something that's different that you don't have to work through with somebody here locally. So those are just a couple of the things. You're probably wondering why Jose isn't here. Jose ran into some VUCA. He was in my green room. He's gone now. He didn't get to hit record. Miscommunication with him and his spouse, and so he apologizes. But that's the way that things happen sometimes. And when they do, the number one thing that you can do and the number one thing that you can be is be adaptable. Okay? Be adaptable. So with that, I'm your host, Kevin Oldham. I would invite you to hit the subscribe button if you enjoy what we're talking about on this show. We've got a YouTube channel. You can see our faces. You can go over there, hit subscribe, or do so on the platform that you're listening to this on now. And then furthermore, we'd love it if you left a review somewhere. Apple, Spotify, that's it. And then final piece of business. We're sponsored by our brand that shares the name of this show, VUCAfit.com. You can go there. You can get free resources. You can get all sorts of really cool things. They're our gift to you. We appreciate you. Have a phenomenal week and be well.